bring all of the phenomenal people, resources, and assets available in our ecosystem together in an effort to co-create what will be the world's first Equitech city. That is a thriving hub of innovation where diversity is our strength and everyone belongs. But first, I want to tell you why it matters to me and what that means for Baltimore. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina in the 80s and 90s, and my two biggest passions were technology and sports. Computers, games, stereo equipment, you name it, I was into it. And when I wasn't playing Nintendo or making some mixtapes from the radio, I was outside playing. Both things captured my imagination and for the most part kept me out of trouble. As I got older, I had to decide on career paths, and sports became the option that I gravitated towards. Sure, I knew about George Washington Carver, Madam C.J. Walker, and Garrett A. Morgan, but to me, those were historical figures. Those people weren't tangible to me. Michael Jordan and Randall Cunningham were. So sports is what I pursued. I was fortunate to earn a football scholarship to the University of North Carolina and then play professionally for 3 seasons. But after that, I found myself at 24 years old, reimagining what my life could look like. And I'm so grateful that I found my way back to one of my first passions, technology. It's exciting to be on the cutting edge of advancement, but also it's important for future generations to know that there is a legacy and a lineage of diverse innovators, and that the ability to impact lives of your family members and the people you love, and more importantly, of the community you live in, lies in the jobs and careers in emerging technologies. Someone who has been at the forefront of creating those types of opportunities in Baltimore for decades is our CEO, Jamie McDonald. In particular, she's done work in West Baltimore with her civic activities. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our CEO, Jamie McDonald.
Thanks so much, Corey. We're really lucky to have Corey as one of the key members of our executive team, helping to bring this big vision that we're going to talk about today to life. I really appreciate the introduction, Corey. And thank you so much to Ron Williams and to the entire team at Coppin who has organized this important conference on economic inclusion for the opportunity to speak with you today. This is a passion of mine, both in general and in particular as it relates to Baltimore. And I look forward to sharing our vision, some of the opportunities that we see ahead and ways that the Coppin community and others across the city can participate, and then to taking your questions. So let's jump in. So just a little bit more about me. I am a city kid from Philly, and like Corey, in many ways, grew up pursuing the things that I saw in front of me, which in my case was, folks largely in service industries. And I ultimately went to a great magnet school that is a little bit like City College here, and went to college as a commuter student at a small school in Philly called what at the time was called the Philadelphia College of Textiles. Today is Philadelphia University and Jefferson, and really got introduced to a sort of a world of possibilities I never knew existed until I went to college. And I can only imagine how many young people walk through the doors at Coppin and have those same windows and doors open to them because they step onto your campus. I ultimately found my way into the financial world, came to Baltimore to work at Alex Brown. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a startup advisor. And I've been deeply, deeply engaged personally and civically in West Baltimore, in particular through my work with the Center for Urban Families, which I helped start 23 years ago and served on the board of for 21 years. And so some of what I bring to this conversation today comes from the experiences that I had with my work with the Center for Urban Families. So we are on a mission at Upsurge to do something that has not been done before in our country. We are on a mission to build the first Equitech city, which is a phrase we coined to describe not just a thriving tech economy, but a thriving tech economy that imagines a method of growing that brings into the tech economy Baltimoreans from across the city and avoids the dislocation and gentrification that has occurred in so many of the brain hubs across the country. So when we think about the work that we do, we are trying to build what you heard Corey describe as a tech for all city, which means that we have to think beyond just the startups themselves. Now, a tech economy can't grow without lots of startups. So of course, we need to be a launching pad for founders of all backgrounds across sectors and stages. Anyone that walks through our door, no matter what their background is, will be shown the data that demonstrates that diversity is a force multiplier in company performance. And that's at the level of the team that works for a company, the leadership, the board often, and in some cases, even the investors. We also are focused on how we can be an advocate and a partner in building pathways into tech for Baltimoreans who seek them. And then we also think a lot about strategies for what we call prosper in place, which is how do we help the very neighborhoods that most need access to pathways of opportunity to do it at a scale so that a large group of people all at one time can be advancing their personal and family aspirations, and neighborhoods can improve. Why is this so critical? Well, at its most fundamental level, we have not necessarily had the job base in Baltimore that puts our smart young people to work in the kinds of jobs that allow them to advance themselves and their families. This is a dated study, but one that came out in 2017, 2018, that showed the average salary of graduates of Baltimore City high schools, depending on how much college they had had. And what you can see is that even those students with a 4-year degree were earning less than what was considered a livable wage in Baltimore. And that's not because they aren't smart, capable, and work ready. It's because in many cases, the jobs aren't here. And the downstream effect of this is something that I probably don't need to tell anyone in this audience, but think about a neighborhood in West Baltimore, like so many of those that I've spent time in, where there are young people who all the neighbors sort of point to and say, you watch what Corey does, he's on a roll, he's going to make big things happen. And if he finishes that 4-year degree and comes back to his neighborhood and can't earn a living wage, it's really, it's a damp blanket on the sort of the focus and the belief in the possibility that working hard, going to school is a way to a different future. So we need to address this in Baltimore. And we think that the way that we do this is by building up a 21st century economy. So this is a chart that I created for the Mayor's Transition Committee, which I served on, which instead of just talking broadly about jobs in Baltimore, looked at really how we think about jobs and all the different kinds of jobs we need. So we need Main Street businesses. They're absolutely vital to a thriving city. We need large scale companies that provide, that sort of critical mass of employment and employees. But we also need a 21st century economy. The red columns here, that's traditional tech startups. So that's a company where the product itself is technology, but it's also scale startups. So that can be a company that could be in retail or a restaurant company or a femtech company, which there are several of in Baltimore, where the product is a product or a service, but technology allows them to scale beyond Baltimore. And the reason that those are so important is because of what is shown here on this chart. Generally, these are higher paying, higher growth businesses. There is often strong wage mobility for people who can get jobs in these kinds of companies and grow with them as they grow. And there are often employee benefits. And so these are not just good jobs because it's cool to say you work in tech. These are good jobs because these jobs pay well, often have wage mobility, and offer the kind of benefits that every employee deserves. The other key part of our opportunity in Baltimore from Upsurge's perspective that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and these are all sort of connected together. So it's not just about the companies, it's also about new opportunities that exist for a talent workforce. So we're in the midst of a completely revolutionary shift in our economy. Before the pandemic, on LinkedIn, in a study that they released a couple of months ago, 1 in 67 jobs had the word remote in its title. Today, 1 in 7 jobs has the word remote in its title. And what that means is that this is an incredible opportunity for a city like Baltimore that can use its location, its strong kind of technical foundation through our deep base of universities. We can look at the cost of living, which for, compared to our peer cities up and down the Amtrak corridor is very affordable. And we think that we can become a place that the tech workforce really decides is a preferred city to live in. So we can, attract those remote workers who can work from anywhere, but we can also go to big tech and say, we're not asking you to move here. We're asking you to consider a diverse talent hub right here in Baltimore that draws on the talented young people that are coming out of our universities and the people who may not choose to go to a four-year or a community college, but who have strong skills that lead them into certifications and other sort of jobs that are so important in our tech world today. And I think that this is one of the really particular opportunities that we think about for Upsurge, but also that are important for institutions like Hopin. I also want to just underscore that not all tech jobs are technical. There are so many other jobs, sales and marketing and social media and business development and HR and operations, finance, so many other jobs that are in the tech world that are really attractive in terms of pay and mobility that don't require somebody to be technical. So it's, I think sometimes young people get afraid of thinking about a job in tech because they think that it means they've got to become, a full stack developer or an engineer. And I think it's important that we constantly remind people that there are all different kinds of skills that are required to make tech companies successful. So where are we today in Baltimore? So when we think about what equitech companies look like, so we're gonna circle back now to the company side rather than the workforce side. We think about equitech companies as 3 kinds of companies. So one is founders of any background who recognize the empirical data that diversity is better for company performance. The second is companies led by underestimated founders, which is a frame that we use to describe any group that gets less than 5% of venture funding in the country, and that is far too many of us. The third is a category that we call tech driving equity, which is where are those breakthrough innovations where the technology itself can actually play a role in breaking down a barrier or reducing the high cost of poverty. And we know that investing in these kinds of companies should be viewed as an opportunity and not an obligation. In a study that came out that was released in the Harvard Business Review, they looked at the financial outcomes of companies across the country based on the diversity of their team's leadership board and investment, and found incredible differences in returns when a company was diverse. That's diverse both in having female founders, in having ethnically diverse team members. And these are not, this isn't a 1 or 2% difference. These are 30, 50, 60, and 70% differences when companies make a priority of diversity. And we're deep today in Baltimore with companies that understand this imperative. We have, companies led by traditional white founders who have diversity as a core value. We have companies led by what people think of as non-traditional founders from all different backgrounds who are really demonstrating that fantastic companies and amazing CEOs come from everywhere. And we have a ton of companies in Baltimore, and this I think is one of our most interesting lanes of opportunity, where people are actually developing technologies themselves that can break down barriers or increase opportunity. And I want to share one particular story. So the biggest exit of any company in Baltimore in the last 3 years, is a company called Thrive Earlier Detection. And an exit, incidentally, is like when a startup grows to a point that they either get sold or they go public. This is something that we closely track because it demonstrates the sort of the health of an ecosystem. And so Thrive is a company that sold for $2.1 billion in 2021. It's a life sciences company that is working to make cancer diagnostics the sort of thing that you can get in a blood draw in your doctor's office, just like you would a cholesterol test. So it's really breakthrough technology. The company was founded by Isaac Kinde, the young man that you see in this picture here. Isaac went to UMBC as a Meyerhoff Scholar, was accepted to Johns Hopkins, and developed this technology working in one of the labs that has really done a good job of commercializing technologies out of Johns Hopkins, and ultimately sold the company that he created to Exact Sciences in 2021. And I share this story not just because it's the story of our biggest exit, but I think it is so fitting that the most successful founder, at least by this measure, in Baltimore in recent memory is a young Black man who had the brilliance and vision to take advantage of an opportunity like going to UMBC on a scholarship and created a company that may change the world. And I think that there are young men like Isaac all across our city and young women who are the Isaacs of the future. And that is a part of what I know we all together, you, the Coppin community, and we, the Upsurge community, are working to build. So what does it really mean to become an Equitech city in a little more detail? This is how we look at it. So we have 6 core lanes of work, and Equitech is a through line to all of them. So obviously we've talked a lot about supporting founders and companies. One of the critical parts of supporting founders and companies is making sure that we've got adequate capital so that companies can grow and thrive. We've talked a lot about talent. We've got to really think about how we both attract and grow talent. Then one of the most important things that we've learned from looking at ecosystems across the country that have grown rapidly is how important collaboration and connection is. So much of what Upsurge has done over our first year is to build bridges within and across the community and across the region and across the country to share this vision, to make sure that people know what's happening in Baltimore, to think about how different people can contribute whatever skill or asset they bring to the table to be part of helping us grow this ecosystem. Then we've got to tell the story. And then finally is this last piece, which I'm going to spend just another minute on, which is how do we build more pathways into tech, and how do we think about building this prosper in place concept that we think is so important. So one is making sure that for companies themselves, we can provide the right support at the right time. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is essentially what Corey does every day, is he meets a company. He thinks about what they need, who they need to connect to, what both skilled resources they need, but also what soft resources they need to be able to sort of, create a platform for their company to grow. Then we have to think about how Baltimoreans who want to be in tech can get the exposure and the education that they need to pursue those jobs, whether that's expanded tech curriculum in our high schools, whether it's more programs in out of school time that are tech and entrepreneurship focused. In addition to that, we have opportunities for training and upskilling for our adult workers. This comes through higher ed. This comes out of companies like Catalyte and others. And obviously a lot of our nonprofits are working on these kinds of programs. And equally importantly, and perhaps more importantly in some instances, we need our companies to think differently about where and how they recruit, and what they do when they hire someone to make sure that somebody that perhaps hasn't grown up knowing the language and the culture of, of startups is given the mentorship and the exposure and the experience they need to be successful when they get these really high opportunity jobs. And so we really are, focused on how companies can do their part to sort of meet the workforce halfway, so that we in fact can create a much more inclusive recruitment approach here in Baltimore than is the sort of norm in other cities. Then we've got to tell the stories of Baltimoreans who sort of pursue these pathways into tech, and then how it affects their family pathway of opportunity. And then ultimately we're going to need some tools, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, but we need a way for both people and companies to find each other who may not, again, be looking in sort of the traditional places like career centers and colleges. When we think about this on-ramps into tech, we look at it across 5 age groups, because we think that it's important to recognize that part of building this tech workforce means that we are thinking in some ways, just again, what Corey said at the beginning of his remarks, that he went down the path of sports because that's the thing he could see. And we need to figure out ways to make sure that that our young people understand that tech it's an exciting, high stature, high paying, cool place to work. And we think that starts with our youngest, people in programs like Code in the Schools and Black Girls Code and Wide Angle Youth Media and Digital Harbor Foundation, all those groups that are working to create those awareness and skills among our youngest Baltimoreans, through high school, where we want to add in the experience component of these pathways and on-ramps, to the opportunity youth and post-secondary young people who, now we can add certifications and placement support. Obviously, college, you're the experts on this. How do we build a very clear set of relationships with the tech community from our colleges across the city, so that we can begin to help people, find those jobs. We help companies find the right people for the right jobs. And then also we think about where entrepreneurship itself comes into play for some of the young people that are coming out of our colleges and universities. And then finally, career stage adults, lots and lots of opportunities to, to pursue upskilling, certification, placement support, and then of course, entrepreneurship. A little bit more on Prosper and Place, and this whole concept that technology can play a role in this. The coming, sort of evolution of blockchain, we think has some very interesting opportunities to generate real estate pilots that can help Baltimoreans who don't want to sort of work through the traditional, mortgage processes, to develop ownership in their apartment building or their block or their neighborhood through these alternative mechanisms. And we'll have more to say about that in the coming months. There are all kinds of technologies now that are breaking down some of the barriers to access to affordable insurance, to affordable lending. EQL Finance is a company that we've been working with that is looking to disrupt the sort of high interest short-term lending industry. Some people call it the payday lending industry, by offering no interest loans in small amounts to people in need. And they can do that because they have, they create a data warehouse of anonymized data that they can sell to other people, not knowing, without ever being, it's Jamie's data being sold to a company, but it's anonymized data about a large group of people that essentially creates the currency that lets EQL offer low interest loans. We've already talked about where virtual tech certification and apprenticeship programs could potentially work, neighborhood-based certification programs. And then there's a lot of work happening both in Baltimore and around the country about using our need for digital equity and sort of the access to broadband as also a workforce expansion program. So these are all ways, these are places where technology and equity and opportunity all intersect. And we're thinking hard about how we can play an important role in supporting and advocating for and pushing these sort of technologies in Baltimore. But anchor institutions like Coppin are key because in so many of these opportunities that I've talked about, they rely on trusted community anchors being the voice into the community for these kinds of opportunities. Coppin's already recognized as a value-added education provider, and drawing on that, that sort of link between education and opportunity, we think is a really critical stepping stone to building our tech workforce. Obviously, every day you unlock the potential of brilliant Baltimoreans. Sorry, I think I've got a word left off there. And then I also think that one of the other things that is interesting to explore with the Coppin community is how we think about the 21st century economy from the inside, which means not just like it's obvious sort of where the tech opportunities of today are, but how do we think ahead to where the opportunities are for cities like Baltimore when we think out 5 or 10 years? And I know that there's so many folks in the Coppin community and in the broadly the academic community across Baltimore with whom we can be doing this big thinking. I'm going to go through a few more slides, then I'm going to skip some slides because my presentation will be available. I'm happy to share the whole thing, but I want to stay to our 30 minutes. And I want to leave you with some good news. So we've got momentum as a city. We're being recognized all across the country for what's happening in Baltimore in tech. In 2020, we saw a huge increase in the number of funded companies, which is one measure. It's the pair of bars all the way to the left, which is the total number of funded companies in Baltimore, which was up 35% last year. And then you can see as each subset of that going to the right by funding level. We saw a breakout year in terms of dollars raised and deal count last year. Our dollars raised in Baltimore, this is venture capital largely, was up 161% last year compared to the national increase of 96%. And our average deal size nearly doubled to almost $8 million last year. We also have a hugely diverse ecosystem. One of the reports that we're going to be putting out in June is a report on the diversity of the Baltimore tech ecosystem. And while it is nowhere near what it needs to be, we think that we are on a path to demonstrating that, that the Equitech vision that we talk about already has a toehold here, and that we're seeing that companies led by diverse founders, companies with diverse team leadership and boards actually can demonstrate the thesis that we're putting out there to the world, which is that they are every bit as brilliant and high potential as companies anywhere else doing sort of the traditional tech thing. We also had 7 deals in the last 12 months that were more than $100 million, which is a sign of an ecosystem on the rise. This is important because this compares to the prior 5 years in which we only had a single deal bigger than $100 million. And you can see right there at the top of the list, the company that we talked about earlier, which is Thrive Earlier Detection, the company led by Isaac Kinde, which is the largest deal in the last, it's in the last 5 or 6 years, but it's certainly in the last year. And then finally, we're often compared to this group of post-industrial cities. And we had a breakout year last year relative to cities that I think a lot of people perceive as being bigger than we are, like Detroit and Pittsburgh. Columbus, has this amazing company called Olive, which itself raised $600 million last year. So, that is great for them, but shows them as sort of breaking away from the pack. But the way that I look at this chart, and it's so important, is, we're in a moment in Baltimore where it's time to start telling our story. We need to have as not just the progress, which we demonstrate here, but we also need the megaphone to tell what's happening here so that more people across the country, whether it's workforce, college students who want to come to Baltimore, because this is a place where a lot of good stuff is happening, or companies themselves are choosing Baltimore as a place to either start or grow. And the other important thing that I say all the time is, our future major companies in Baltimore are not going to be imported. They're going to grow up here. And so this shows that we're starting that process of building the kinds of companies that can be the critical employers of the future. You can see we're very healthcare focused, but we are broadly, spread across industries. Again, I will share this. This is just some of the work that Upsurge has done in its first year, including the opportunity to speak with groups like this. I'm going to skip this part entirely. And I want to close just with a couple of thoughts on how this all looks over time when we bring it all together. So if we can do this in partnership with universities like Coppin, with our local startups, with our big companies, with city government, and with all the other folks in Baltimore that will be critical to building this inclusive tech city, the first in the world, we think this is what it's going to look like. That we're going to, starting on the red on the left, we're going to nurture and grow companies across the Baltimore tech ecosystem. We're going to attract and invest in companies through accelerator hubs, and that's something we can talk about on another day. We're going to expand our workforce through our pathways work, which we've talked about a lot in this conversation. And we're going to, start to do those experiments with the Prosper in Place pilots that help us to create opportunity within neighborhoods for more Baltimoreans to participate in the 21st century economy. Then in the blue, as we do all of that, there's a whole series of experiments that are going to be required to figure out what works. That's what's happening in this blue star here. Then as we start to figure that out, you've got to scale the things that work and you've got to do away with the stuff that doesn't. And when that happens, we hope that those best solutions start to scale and we see Baltimore families build wealth and neighborhoods stabilize. In the yellow, we see more companies launching or locating here. We see more companies started by diverse local founders, and we see more companies hiring locally. And if we can bring all of that together over 10 years or so, we think this is, it's a very long-term vision. That is how we set Baltimore as a model for the country and ultimately the world. And it's really it's a critical path toward a reimagined city that uses technology as a flywheel, but recognizes that we have to do it in such a way that we don't leave behind the Baltimoreans that make up our beautiful city. And that's too often what has happened in so many of the other tech cities across the country. And we've got to be deliberate about it from the beginning. So that is where we are with Upsurge. Coppin can play a very critical role as a voice into the community about the importance of technology and about the importance of thinking about 21st century jobs as really vital to our future as a city. Already Coppin is a leader in a tech-focused curriculum, but there are probably other things that we could be thinking about in terms of ways that we can support that and grow that. We need to build awareness among students of opportunities in tech, both the technical and the non-technical opportunities. We want to create direct pathways for internships and other engagement with our startups. Entrepreneurship curriculum can really show young people that either they have the opportunity potentially to become entrepreneurs, or that working in entrepreneurial companies is a really great way to learn fast about an industry where you can gain a lot of seniority in a very short time if you're a smart, determined young person. we're going to need to try some of these community pilots, some of these Prosper in Place pilots, and imagine if we had students or even professors as ambassadors, advocates, and leaders of those programs in communities. Talked a lot about tech certification and this broadband workforce expansion programs. Those are all places where we see Koppen, playing a role. And then I left this off here. I don't know how I did this, but of course, the work that Ron is doing around advanced manufacturing and using the sort of the technology and manufacturing intersection as one of the real hallmarks of Baltimore's tech economy as we look forward, we think is an enormous opportunity. And we're really excited to play a role in supporting that. So I will stop there. I want to thank you again. That was a jam-packed half hour. As I said, I will share my slides with anyone who is interested so that you can dig a little deeper into the sort of wide-ranging opportunity that we see and that we're pursuing with Upsurge. And then Corey, I, and our other colleague, Hillary, are here to answer any of your questions. Thanks so much for your time today.